Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, Gary Cohen joins us. We catch up on the 2022 Mets, memorable moments, and much more. Later on, Joe and I dive into the return of Luis Guillorme, a scorching hot Escobar, Vientos debut, and as always, close out the show answering your mailbag questions. Reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And we are very excited to be joined by a man that needs no introduction, Gary Cohen. Gary, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm well, guys. How you doing today?
Good. You've been, I think, the number one person our listeners ask for the most over the last month. So we're really excited for this. And I wanted to kick things off. Obviously, the Mets are having an incredible season. We can feel it in the booth, though, how excited you guys are each day and night to watch this team, to call games for this team. So I kind of wanted to start with, what is different about the 2022 Mets in comparison to so many teams in the past you've called games for?
Well, I think it starts with Buck. I mean, I think the goal this year and going forward was to change the culture of the team. I think there's been a level of accountability, which starts with the front office and ownership and filters down to the manager. And Buck was an inspired choice for this team. And I think it's also that they brought in great people. I mean, when they made the moves in the offseason, knowing what we knew about Max Scherzer and starting Marte and Eduardo Escobar and Adam Ottavino and Mark Canha, Chris Bassett, all these guys came with great reputations as being veteran, accountable players. And I think it's played out exactly that way. And I think that's been the most fun about watching this team, is that stuff does not slip through the cracks, that they do all the little things well. And, you know, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful every day, but it gives you the best chance to win. And I think that's why it's been such an enjoyable season so far.
So you mentioned all the new additions, and that's a segue to what I wanted to ask. So you obviously always mention conversations that you have with some of the players before the game and things like that. What new addition to this year's team has impressed you the most on and off the field?
Well, I think there are a lot of them. I mean, you know, Scherzer is amazing because of the impact that he has on everybody else around him, just his attitude every day, both the days that he's pitching and especially the days that he's not. He is in everybody's ear. He's really Buck's kind of player, because Buck likes people who see nuance and question everything. But in terms of on the field, the guy who I probably have been most impressed by, because, you know, I'd seen him a little bit, but hadn't seen him play every day, was Starling Marte. I mean, the guy just does everything well. He's a tremendous athlete. He could have been a star in just about any sport. But just the way he approaches his at-bats to play a brand new position in right field and play it as well as he has. I love watching that guy play.
Yeah, so do we. Marte's been absolutely incredible. So we kind of wanted to do a little look back in time here with you, Gary, and ask you, do you have a favorite call of your career for the Mets? And if not, is there a Mount Rushmore of four that really stick out to you?
Yeah, I don't really look at it that way. I will tell you that my favorite season was 1999, because, you know, I started with the Mets in 89, which was the year after they had the greatest 5-year stretch in the history of the franchise from 84 to 88. And the first 10 years that I was on the radio for the Mets, they didn't make the postseason. So 99 was the first time I had that experience, but it wasn't just getting to the postseason. It was what led up to it. There were so many great moments, you know, coming from 4 runs down in the ninth to beat Curt Schilling, and Matt Franco's walk-off hit against Mariano Rivera, just moment after moment. And then in the postseason, the Todd Pratt home run and the Robin Ventura grand slam single. And I got to call all of those. And that was the year that always stands out to me. So I always feel as though the most important call is the next one. And my feeling about broadcasting in general is that it's not necessarily about the big moment. It's about the totality of the 3.5 hours of the game and how well you wear on a listener or a viewer. So that's the way I look at calls and moments and the day-to-day of doing this job.
So I know life on the road is crazy, but you guys are home now on a little mini homestand here. What is that game day routine like for you? How early do you get to the ballpark, and just what is it like when you're home for a Citi Field game?
It doesn't really matter whether it's home or road. This is a 24-hour-a-day job. The way I always characterize it is we dive into the deep end of the pool in March and we come up for air in October. I mean, seriously, I wake up in the morning and I get my coffee and I turn on my computer and I'm spending several hours reading and taking notes and trying to keep up to date because baseball changes every day. It's not football where you're spending a week getting ready for a game. I mean, there were 14 other games on a given night that you have to know what happened and backstories and all sorts of stuff because let's face it, especially the way the game is played right now, and hopefully it gets a little better next year, you're talking about 3.5 hours of game with 8 minutes of action. There's a lot of time to fill, and you'd like to be as well versed in everything as possible. So I would say that the vast majority of my waking hours are spent getting ready for the game, whether that's sitting at home or when I get to the ballpark.
Speaking of being home, 10-year-old Joe back in 2008, I was at the last game at Shea, sitting in the red seats right next to the foul pole with my mom, just watching Ryan Church's fly ball, hoping it would just go a few feet further. I wanted to ask you, as someone that, like you mentioned, you started on the radio and covering the team in 1989, what were your emotions on the last day of Shea while also looking ahead to the move across the parking lot to Citi Field?
Yeah, it was a crazy emotional day. If you remember, the Mets had a lead late, and then they gave up back-to-back home runs, two different relief pitchers, and I thought Ryan Church's ball had a chance, but then I thought Mike Piazza's ball had a chance in Game 5 against the Yankees. It was weird because it was the second straight year that the Mets had melted down late. Although this one you kind of saw coming because their bullpen had fallen apart, so it really wasn't a shock as much as 07 was. But then to transition to the incredible ceremony closing the park, I mean, with everybody stepping on home plate and Piazza and Seaver walking out through the center field gate, I was moved to tears, and it was a tough transition. I know a lot of people who were at the game that day were so disappointed in the result they didn't even stay around for the ceremony. But I think that everybody who stayed was happy that they did. And Shea Stadium was my home, not just as a broadcaster, but as a kid. I mean, I spent 500 nights sitting in the upper deck at Shea Stadium, and after the game was over and after the ceremony was over, we stayed around for quite some time afterward. And I went out on the field and I got some dirt and put it in, a sealed container. And I still have that because it's hard for me to even fathom at this point that Shea Stadium no longer exists. And every once in a while, I'll go out to the parking lot and look at home plate and the pitcher's mound and the bases and remember where we were and how many days and nights we spent there. So it was pretty emotional. It was, I don't know how it struck you as a kid, but as an adult who had spent so much time there, it was a very, very roller coaster kind of a day.
It was very much home for me. That's my mom got me into baseball, bringing me to Shea. I cried to this day. I'm just a crier, so I cried leaving Shea at 10 years old. But let's fast forward to this weekend. You're getting a bobblehead this weekend. if I told you a couple of years ago that you'd be getting a bobblehead, what would you say? And what are your thoughts on it now? And the fact that it will be a sought after item.
Well, I would have said the same thing then that I'll say now, which is that I don't really feel as though anybody would want my bobblehead, and I don't really understand the entire concept. I think marketing did a great job by making it a piece of a triptych with Keith and Ron. I'm not sure it would be as desirable as a one-off, so I'm just happy to be connected with those guys, and it's really weird. There's no other way I can put it. It just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Gary, those things on the secondary market are going to be nuts. It's too bad you're not getting royalties on them. It's going to be really crazy. But
I'm just glad I'm going to have a few of them. They've promised me a few to have for my own.
Love that. So both Joe and I, unfortunately and fortunately, we live in the world of Mets Twitter. It's the and Joe and I on the podcast always try to be even keeled. We're never too high or too low after a week of games. And you talked about it a bit the other night during one of the games during the Miami series, and it was really interesting. And how interesting is it to you with Mets Twitter, the highs and lows? Meanwhile, the Mets are in the middle of one of their best seasons I can ever remember in watching this team since the early 90s.
Yeah, well, I don't spend a lot of time scrolling through Mets Twitter, but I'm very aware of a lot of the anger that surfaces when the team doesn't play well. But honestly, it's not just about the Mets. I mean, let's face it, social media has completely changed the way people engage about just about everything. And there's a lot of inarticulate anger out there, and some semi-articulate anger that people are able to express, and everybody's got a platform in a way that has never been the case before. It started with sports talk radio, which it didn't exist when I was a kid, except for the one-off show that would be on once a week. The 24-hour a day thing, began in 1987. So that morphed its way into social media, and I think that it's great that people have a voice. I try to ignore 99.9% of it, and I think it's always in the best interests of the people who are competing to ignore 100% of it. But if it gives people pleasure to interact in that fashion, then all power to them, as long as, everybody keeps it somewhat civil.
You're asking for a lot there,
which isn't always the case.
Good word, good choice of words, and I assume Connor and I are in that 0.1%.
Yeah.
What? So, I think I speak for Connor, and I think it's a pleasure that we have the opportunity to have you and Keith and Ron in the booth as our broadcast team, as Mets fans. How would you describe being in the booth with Keith and Ron, both from the baseball insight that's unique and the fun, crazy, offbeat, whatever term you want to use for the personalities and chemistry? How would you kind of describe the whole idea of being with Keith and Ron?
Well, I don't know how it works. I really don't. I knew Keith and Ron when they were players. Keith's last year as a Met was my first year as a broadcaster. So I knew him at arm's length. Ronnie was there for a little bit longer, and I probably knew him a little bit better. And my greatest memory of Ronnie as a player was always 1991 when he got traded to the Expos. And I was at Dodger Stadium doing a game for CBS Radio between the Expos and the Dodgers. And I walked into the Expos clubhouse and I saw Ronnie there. And he greeted me like an old friend. And we weren't really old friends, but he saw a familiar face. And there was a stunned look on his face, like, what the heck has happened to me getting traded to the Expos? So that will always be my memory of Ronnie as a player. But I've gotten to know them in a way that I never could have imagined. And they become friends in a way that I could not have foreseen. And the chemistry is something that I don't get. Ronnie likes to characterize it as free-form jazz. The way I look at it is we all really needed each other badly when we started. I had never really done TV before. I was a radio guy. Keith had kind of dabbled in TV, but he really hadn't taken it seriously. Ronnie had done 1 year for the Nationals where he was thrown into the mix the day before the season started and really had no direction. And none of us really knew what we were doing. And I think from day one, we understood that we needed to lean on each other. And that's really the way it's gone for 17 years. Nobody is the leader. Nobody is the follower. Everybody has a voice. Nobody needs to be the star. None of us feels as though we need to be on camera and preening. It's as low ego an environment as it can be. And, we all have our areas of expertise, both in terms of baseball and in terms of life. And somehow it all intersects and makes for something that's enjoyable for us. And the way I've always seen it in every broadcast environment that I've been in, if we're having fun, then there's a better chance that you're having fun.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The balance is unbelievable, and trust me, we do enjoy. We have fun every single game listening to you guys. All right, so on another funny note, Jerry Seinfeld wasn't too happy with Timmy Trumpet's live appearance at Citi Field. What were your thoughts on it, Gary? It seemed like you guys were having a good time, and obviously the energy in the ballpark was extraordinary.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, the Edwin Diaz entrance music has created an environment that I have never seen before with the Mets, and the Mets in stadium folks have embraced it, and our producer and director Greg Picker and John DeMarsico have embraced it and had a lot of fun with it. And Timmy Trumpet was so enthusiastic when he came out, and a guy who had never seen a baseball game before, and he was reveling in this because it's resurrected this song and made it a #1 hit on Spotify, and I thought it was fantastic. And you should know me well enough to know that although a lot of people believe in jinxes, I am not one who believes in jinxes. So I don't think that the Baja Man caused the Mets to lose the World Series. And I certainly don't think that Timmy Trumpet was responsible for the Mets losing a couple of games to the Nationals. I don't go in that direction.
So finally, we have to wrap with this one. It was a very funny moment on air during the game when Keith did not remember that he did this show. And Steve Gelbs had to chime in and say, yeah, Keith, you did it a couple weeks ago for 37 minutes. Will you remember being on the Mets pod when the promo comes up during the game?
I think there's a good chance that I will remember the show. Now, whether I remember which one of you is Connor and which one of you is Joe, that's really up in the air. But I will definitely remember that I was here, and hopefully there'll be a memorable moment or two that you take out of it as well.
Well, Gary, we were impressed when you did the read without having the read in front of you. That meant a lot to us as well. So it's been a blast having you on. We've been waiting and really excited for this one, and I know the listeners have too. And you are the voice to all Mets fans, and we can't thank you enough.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on, and I'll read the promos with a little more gusto now.
Love it.
Appreciate it. Yeah, next time we come through, we did a live show, a couple months back, and they brought us up to the booth, but you guys were just getting ready to start, so we just kind of peeked in. Next time, we'll work it out to get up there a little earlier so we could say hi.
Say hello.
That would be great.
Thank you, Gary.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, great stuff from Gary Cohen. Obviously, somebody we've been really excited to talk to, and boy, does he deliver with stories, everything on this team. A lot of fun. A reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. Joe, we got to talk about the offense with this team. The roller coaster that never seems to end. Some games they're scoring 9 runs in their sleep. Some games they can't hit pitchers that a lot of people have never even heard of. So obviously not hitting the panic alarm, but there is some odd good news here. Eduardo Escobar is scorching hot right now. Luis Guillorme is on his way back. They're getting production out of catcher. Out of nowhere, James McCann and Tomas Nido are hitting. But let's stick with Escobar and Guillorme. We know Guillorme is returning. How would you personally play out this situation? Is there a way to keep all of these guys consistently in the lineup? Because we know Guillorme's glove just has to be out there on a consistent basis.
while Starling Marte is out, yeah, when Marte gets back, it's probably a little complicated because the way Eduardo Escobar is hitting right now from both sides of the plate, I mean, it wasn't very long ago that we were like, there's no way Eduardo Escobar could play against right-handed pitching. Now he's raking from both sides of the plate. Like you said, he's as on fire as anybody on this team. But while Starling Marte is still coming back from the fracture in his finger, I think the move is Escobar at third every day, Luis Guillorme at second pretty much every day, and Jeff McNeil out in right field. And when that, I think, is putting your best possible lineup out there on a day-to-day basis. And then when Marte comes back, then you have to do a little shuffling if Guillorme warrants the ability to kind of make it in that lineup on a regular basis. But you can't take Eduardo Escobar off the field at this point, I don't think.
No, you can't. To put it in perspective, over the last month, Escobar is over the last 2 weeks, Escobar is 21 for 46. He's hit 5 home runs. He's scored 8 runs, driven in 9 during that span. He's getting on base almost half of his at-bats. Half. 490 on base percentage. I think that's a great plan. I think it's, this is actually even a stretch of, this isn't the Eduardo Escobar we were hoping for or expected when they signed him. This is even beyond that. But it just shows the balance of a season. He had a miserable first half. He goes on the IL at some point in the second half. Now he's back where he's scorching hot. He's a guy that's played a lot of meaningful games at this time of the year. I think that's something that a lot of people are getting excited for is, this is a veteran. I think Ronnie said on the broadcast, like, this is the kind of guy that teams might trade for. And fortunately, he seems to be turning it around for the Mets. And I think that, something you and I have discussed plenty is that, oddly enough, there is an element to this team missing Luis Guillorme in the lineup. We know he's a Gold Glove caliber player in the field, even at multiple spots. But it's not. We know Guillorme's not a power hitter. But he works counts in a similar way to Nimmo, except it's more on the back end of the lineup that he gets starting pitchers out early in the game. He can put the ball in play in situations that they just need a run. I think that's been a big problem for the Mets lately. A lot of guys, unfortunately, Ruf a lot, even Vogelback recently a little bit, Pete a little bit. They're not putting the ball in play when they could just have a sacrifice situation. And I think that's something that Guillorme at the bottom of the lineup can do.
Definitely. I think the lineup right now, it's funny because we've talked for this entire season, and frankly, up until fairly recently, it's been a valid point that the Mets have been nothing but consistent at the plate. Working counts, putting the ball in play, driving runners in, even if it's not with hits, sac flies. But recently, that's not been the case. It's definitely a poor time to start going through a funk. As obviously the Atlanta Braves almost never lose baseball games, even though they've now lost a couple in a row.
3 of the last 4.
Three of the last 4. Yeah, it's a miracle. They're playing teams that have something to play for, and they are under 500 this season against teams over 500. So Atlanta facing better teams is helping. The Mets just need to take advantage. Like, they're facing the Cubs. They need to win Tuesday and Wednesday. They need to take 2 out of 3. It would be nice if they could sweep one of these not so good teams and kind of put a stamp. Because like you said, it's very hot and cold. It'll be a day they score 10, and then positive Joe over here is just like, see, this offense is talented. Today's the day they turn around. Then the next day they face a pitcher I've never heard of, and they score 1 run off them. So it's definitely been a weird stretch for them. I think if you want to take the glass half full approach, I kind of rather have them have that funk now than like 3 weeks from now when it really, really matters. But the glass half empty approach is maybe they're not as consistent as we thought they were.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and I think that there is a point to this that they're a little banged up right now. Marte's been their most consistent player on the entire team, and he's out, and they need him to get right for when these games, not saying these games don't matter, because they significantly matter, but when it's win or go home situations.
So the need to win the division, I think, is being under talked about
a
little bit.
I agree. And
with the way the playoff kind of bracket sets up, if the season ended today, the Mets would have won the NL East. They would be the 2 seed, so they'd get a bye. And the way it was formatted by MLB, the Mets would face the winner of the Cardinals-Padres series, Whereas on the other side of the NL bracket, it would be the Braves and the Phillies in the 2 out of 3 wild card, and the winner goes to LA to face the Dodgers.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you don't win the division, you have to go through presumably the Phillies, a division rival, and then the Dodgers before you get to the NLCS. And not to throw dirt on the Cardinals or Padres, who are great teams in their own right, that in theory could beat the Mets too. I would rather take my chances that I face one of those teams, and then I don't have to deal with the Braves, Phillies, Dodgers until the NLCS.
Nobody wants to see the Dodgers, right? Until they have to, right? I mean, you can say what you want about them. Yeah, it was fun. The Mets took 2 of 3 the last time they met, but just realistically, nobody wants to see the October Dodgers, right? We know what they're going to be and how healthy and ready to go they're going to be. And I think an underlying factor of this that plenty of Mets fans are aware of, but maybe there just hasn't been, it hasn't been consistently brought up, is that this pitching staff, the weapon the Mets have is that they get Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom, whatever order you see it, back to back. And if you don't get that bye, they don't start the series most likely in that order of game 1 and 2 back to back. You're going to have to wait for them. Meanwhile, and I hate bringing this up, but Scherzer, we know the situation he dealt with last postseason, right? Do everything you can to have these guys full strength, right? So if you get the bye, you start out the NLDS with a fully ramped up, ready to go, maybe pitch really deep into the game, Scherzer, deGrom, and then you might even be able to get them on the back end of the series as well. So the bye is extremely important, not to just everybody, but specifically to me, to the New York Mets.
Definitely very important, and I think what's good to note is the kind of lack of off days that there are in these series. So you don't really have the ability to say, all right, well, we have these days off, so we're going to be able to throw a guy on slightly short rest. It's day after day after day in the series. So that impacts it, especially, if they do hypothetically have to play in the wild card round, you're obviously going to throw Jake and Scherzer games 1 and 2 in some order. And if you have to go to game 3, then it's Bassett. And at that point, your game 1 starter of an NLDS is Taijuan Walker, Carlos Carrasco, David Peterson, name your guy. And then at that point, you probably can loop back with Jake or Max. But that limits your ability to have one of them start a game 5 if necessary. So it definitely is a huge impact. So this whole win the division thing is actually a really big conversation when you think about the health of the rotation, the way the pitchers have to pitch, as well as, obviously, I mentioned the opponents that you'll have to go through. I mean, you have to beat good teams to win a World Series. It's the nature of the beast. But if you can make my path a little bit easier, I'm happier with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the Mets, that would make things, I think, a lot easier. All right, let's get into Mark Vientos real briefly before we hit the mailbag. He makes his debut. It's an odd situation. We've been asking for him to be here since July. They play him in the DH role his first game up. He's 0 for 5. They don't use him in a pretty big spot. They go to Ruf instead Monday night against the Cubs when they have men on base. So Vientos is here, Joe, and that's all well and good. Vogelback's struggling. Ruf has been a disaster since they got him. Just say it what it is. He's been an absolute disaster. They're holding on for dear life for whatever reason. It almost felt like Vientos is only here because Marte got hurt. It's not that they're like, hey, the offense is not consistent and we need more power. So after all that, giving a really disappointing intro to Vientos finally being here, Joe, at what point do they actually give him a real shot to stay here?
I mean, if there's any evidence from Monday night, what they did in the Cubs game, they may not give him a shot at all. Like, he may only be here because Starling Marte's injured, and they didn't want to add somebody else to the 40-man roster and have to complicate things here in the next week or two. They just figured they'd call up Vientos. I think it was very telling that they pinch hit with Darin Ruf on Monday night and not Vientos. And Vientos has mashed lefties down in AAA. Darin Ruf historically has done it, which I know that's what Buck said after the game. But Darin Ruf has 1 hit in over a month. So I don't want to see Darin Ruf batting at all. I'm not interested in it. Like, I get struggling. It happens. Like Vogelback, you mentioned, is going through a bit of a skid right now. But Darin Ruf not only is not playing well, he doesn't look like he's competing when he's up at the plate. They're not good at bats. He's not working deep counts. he's swinging through strikes. I think I texted you the other day in one of his at bats when you were doing Jets pregame and everything. Like his at bat, 3 strikes, swing and miss, swing and miss, swing and miss. Didn't even touch a ball. So it's very disappointing how Darin Ruf has played, and I'm personally very disappointed if it is what it seems that Vientos is here just because they needed somebody to take Marte's spot on the roster rather than actually potentially pushing Darin Ruf, because I dread the thought, and I feel like we're being very mean to poor Darin Ruf, but like I dread the thought of a postseason series where the Mets are facing Max Fried in the NLCS or something, and Darin Ruf is in the lineup against Max Fried in a playoff series. I dread that thought.
How could you not? Listen, this was the budget move that Billy Epler made to get the Mets right-handed help against left-handed pitching to get more power, and the thing is, it's not the sake of like he's not going through a cold streak. He wasn't having even a typical rough year. Yeah, he was having a rough year with the Giants. Terrible. Just ignore that bit. No, but seriously, he wasn't having a great year with the Giants, and we've seen enough with the Mets that this is the only time you have to try something else, and you're running out of time, and you don't want to just hope it all clicks in October, right? This isn't a situation like Escobar has turned around where there is tangible results. With Rupp, you are now in the praying stage where, man, you're right, Joe. And the at-bats he's had, it's not like he's going against Max Fried every night. They put him in spots that should be advantageous to him. And if they put Vientos in those spots, they should be advantageous to him as well. See what you have. It's very frustrating. There's our classic Vientos frustrating rant of the show of the week.
All I know is Joe DeMayo, Connor Rogers, Darin Ruf have the same amount of home runs as a New York Met. None. So the power they were seeking is not there. And it's disappointing that, like, if they pinch hit Mark Vientos last night and he struck out, our conversation is still different. They gave a look. But Buck after game just saying, yeah, Ruff has a history of doing well in these spots. There's got to be a little more urgency here in this stretch run to really try to shake things up and, get an offense that's not clicking. And, maybe Vientos will hit a grand slam. Like, in that 0 for 5, he took what looked like a basic swing and put a ball 3 feet to the fence and right. Like, that's real power. So it was disappointing they didn't give him a shot. And I think there's a lefty pitching on Wednesday for the Cubs. I think it's supposed to be Drew Smiley. So we'll see if Vientos is not in the lineup on Wednesday, then you might as well print out his ticket back to Syracuse when Marte comes back.
Let's hope. All right. Give us a reason to Smiley on Wednesday, Vientos. All right, mailbag time. Let's get right into it. This one from Shea and Shared Misery. He says, which current Mets will benefit/suffer the most from the rule changes for next year? Obviously, he's hinting at the shift rules that will essentially eliminate the shift, let's be honest. There is going to be the pitch clock. I recommend reading it thoroughly because it is very, very interesting. Joe, I'll throw to you right away. We all know Chris Bassett takes 3 minutes between pitches, so we don't even have to get into the pitch clock situation. What hitter do you think might benefit, I'll throw it either way, benefit or be hurt by the lack of the shift?
I almost wonder if Jeff McNeil would be hurt by the shift because he's the only guy that I see that beats the shift routinely.
All the time.
So they shift against him, he goes the other way. So if it's going to be a point where they cannot shift and they have to play more straight up, maybe Jeff McNeil is slightly negatively impacted by it. By the way, I've spoken to 5 different minor league players, 4 with the Mets, 1 not with the Mets, and every single one of them loved the pitch clock. 2 pitchers, 3 hitters. No one has a problem with the pitch clock. So I don't think the pitch clock is a negative. I think fans are going to like it. It's going to shorten games. That is evident by what's happening in the minor leagues, that games are shorter because of the pitch clock. But I don't think I don't have any negative feedback on it from the people I've talked to.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear from Lindor after about it. Lindor was like, I don't really step out of the batter's box very often, so, it's good. And that was my answer for who I think benefits from it. You said McNeil could be... You're not really saying, like, McNeil's going to have problems. You're just saying that him punching the ball through wherever there's a hole, those days are going to be a little bit more limited. I think Francisco Lindor is really going to benefit from this. I think he's somebody that At times, teams have really successfully shifted him. He hits the ball very, very hard, but it just feels like he hits it at where there's gloves a lot. I could just be completely wrong here, Joe, but I find Lindor to be a pull hitter when he's hitting for power, and that's not just home runs, but more so shooting the ball line drives into right field, where the second baseman's just playing mini right field all the time. So I think it'll actually help Lindor's batting average hover more in the 280 area without the shift.
Yeah, and he's more of a pull hitter from the left side.
Yes.
Like on the right side, he's an all-field hitter. He has that more level swing, and you see him take balls to right, pull him down the line. But when he's a lefty, it's a little more of an uppercut type of stroke where he's trying to pull the ball and pull the ball for power. So, yeah, I think that's a good one. He is someone that would benefit, especially when he's on the left side of the plate.
All right, one more mailbag question to close out this week's show from Johnny. He said, Marte getting injured catapulted Jeff into the top 3 of the lineup, but do you think this is a real audition for a role in the top third? Or do you think we see Jeff move back to the 5, 6, 7 area again once Marte returns? Joe, I would be very surprised if Marte isn't cemented back into the 2 spot when he's healthy. But on the flip side, I think the days of McNeil batting 7th are long over.
Yeah, I think Jeff McNeil is going to position himself into the 5 spot. Once everything's healthy, you're going to go Nimmo, you're going to go Marte, and then you're going to go Lindor, Alonso, Lindor, whatever, 3-4. And then I think it's McNeil. And to be honest with you, at this point, it's a toss-up. Is it Mark Canha or Eduardo Escobar batting 6th? So they're in a position where with the hot streak of Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha has been actually very consistent over the last month or so as well. McNeil in the 5 spot will give opportunities for those guys to drive in runs. And now the bottom of the order is a little less concerning, I think, than maybe it was in the past. Because now you could push those DHs down. Like Vogelback is a big bat in theory. He hasn't hit for power ever since kind of his hamstring that he was working through. The power hasn't really been there. So I don't know if that's affecting him. But I see no reason why he should be him or Ruf or Vientos or whoever's the DH. I don't see why those guys should be batting any higher than 7th at this point, given what you are seeing from, I'm sorry, not 7th. Yeah, this should be like 7th or 8th.
7th,
given what you're seeing from the guys like Canha and Escobar.
Yeah, I think they like Canha a lot in that 6th spot, especially when you're balancing sides of the plate. It helps that Escobar's a switch hitter that couldn't hit anything as a lefty in the first half of the year, and since he's been back, he's just, you can't get him out at all. So I do think there is balance here. I think the answer is Marte's going to be back in the 2 hole, but I think McNeil is going to stay right in that 5th area, as Joe alluded to. All right, well, the Mets got to take care of business. The Braves finally showed they can lose a few games here and there, not 1 out of every 10 or whatever it is. Joe, closing thoughts for this week's episode of the Mets Pod.
How cool is it that we had Gary Cohen on? I mean,
extremely cool.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't hide that we're Mets fans here.
No.
Like it's not a secret. And
why we're
I'll
sitting
tell
here.
you, yeah, like us Mets fans having Gary Cohen talk to us, tell the stories that he did, and the fact that there's going to be an ad read in tonight's game and tomorrow's game or whatever on SNY, and Gary Cohen just says our names on TV. It's kind of like, this is cool, man. So it's a great time to be Joe and Connor. And hopefully for the remainder of this week, it's a good time to be a New York Met.
I love it. I wonder if we get the plot twist. Did you see Keith read Gary Cohen's bobblehead promo? Is Gary going to read his own promo for the Mets spot, or is Keith going to read the promo for the Mets spot? Hey, stay here. You got to watch the Mets tonight for all the mystery. Reminder to subscribe to the Mets spot at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.